I'm pleased to share today's program with you. We'll take a walk back in time, the years 1865 to 1892 to be exact. Our nation is burying hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Our nation is singing the immensely popular song, When Johnny Comes Marching Home, as people long for the safe return of family and friends from the Civil War.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The village lads and lassies say, with roses they will strew the way, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
But heartbroken wives and mothers of slain husbands and sons wish the song to be true more than they believe it to be so. And then death moves from the blood-soaked battlefields of Gettysburg and Shiloh and Vicksburg to the dignified presidential box at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. The nation has another widow and is reminded that, constitutionally, a vice president is just one heartbeat away from the presidency. It seems the nation's heart has stopped beating. What can resuscitate it? Education, inventions and industry, factories, transportation, the arts? War has a way of asking strong women to do double duty. Who will be the next group of strong women to lead the way from the White House? That brings us to the heart of this program. Today we will learn about the lives of three lesser-known First Ladies, each of whom served in the aftermath of the Civil War. The Civil War wouldn't totally define the lives of these remarkable women, but the war would not exempt them from living lives of service, support, sacrifice, and separation. For example, one of our featured First Ladies was evicted from her home in Greenville, Tennessee, and told to leave the state during the war. Another lesser-known First Lady often visited her husband's Union military encampments, where she was held in high regard by the soldiers of his regiment. But first, we remember Lincoln's heartfelt plea to the nation in his second inaugural address: with malice toward none, with charity for all. It turns out that John Wilkes Booth has other ideas. His assassination of President Lincoln, a horrific act of malice, makes it difficult to bind up the nation's wounds.
Robert E. Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant's Army of the Potomac on April 9, 1865. President Abraham Lincoln was shot on April 14th and died on April 15th. Andrew Johnson was sworn in as president the same day. The nation, North and South, reeled in shock and confusion as both the federal government and the people tried to grasp the situation. Here are the basics. Slavery was abolished. The Emancipation Proclamation had freed slaves in Confederate territory in 1863, and the 13th Amendment had made emancipation national and permanent in 1865. But the social, political, and economic places of the approximately 4 million freed people in the nation was very uncertain, especially in the South, where the entire labor system and social order would have to be recreated. The former Confederacy was in ruins, cropland destroyed or deserted, governments in disarray or gone altogether. people homeless and starving, roads, railroads, and harbors destroyed, and the economic orders overturned. An embittered white population saw increasing racial violence. The human cost of the war had been staggering. Approximately 1 in every 4 soldiers who marched off to war did not return home. An estimated 750,000 military personnel were dead, more from disease than from direct battle. 476,000 soldiers were wounded, many of them amputees. The civilian casualties were significant as well. Possibly 50,000 total died, the majority of them in the South. Survivors were uprooted and moving, soldiers finding their way home, freed people searching for family members, Northerners moving south and others moving west or to cities. Widows and orphans were struggling to survive. The Republican Party had renamed itself the Union Party for the 1864 election in order to gain votes from Democrats who supported the Union war effort. And Johnson had been put on the Union Party ticket with Lincoln because he was one of those war Democrats. No one had expected that this Southern Democrat would actually become president. Certainly the radical Republicans in Congress had not. Johnson had asserted in 1864 that he hated the Southern aristocracy and that he thought they should be punished for leading the South to secede and go to war. But after he became president, it quickly became clear that he'd changed his mind, and his plan for Reconstruction was not what the radical Republicans wanted. When Congress reconvened in December 1865, a major collision between the Republican Congress and the president would be unavoidable. In the meantime, President Johnson was a virtual unknown to the American public.
I was born in 1810 in Leesburg, Tennessee. I was an only child. My father died when I was quite young. I was well educated for my time. I met and married my husband when he moved to Greenville, Tennessee. We both were poor. I was only 16 at the time of my marriage, the youngest bride of any First Lady. Do you know my name?
I spent my entire life in Ohio, except for the 4 years I lived in the White House in Washington, D.C. My father was a physician. I was only 2 years old when he died in 1833 of an infection from a cholera epidemic. My mother believed strongly women should receive higher learning. I finished my education at Wesleyan Female College in Cincinnati at the age of 18. The first lady to receive a college degree. Do you know my name?
I was born in Oxford, Ohio in 1832. My father was a Presbyterian minister and founder of the Oxford Female Institute. I graduated from the Institute, taught piano classes, and loved the arts. I married a lawyer who would become the Centennial President. I had a special talent for china painting, and I started the White House China Collection. Do you know my name?
Let's get acquainted with these 3 First Ladies as they tell us in their own words about matters of the heart, a heart for service, and heartache and their end.
There goes my bow.
Love at first sight can be a powerful thing. So it was for Eliza McCardle and Andrew Johnson. In 1826, Andrew moved from Raleigh, North Carolina to Greenville, Tennessee, where he set up a tailor shop. Andrew was young, robust, and skilled at his trade. It's no wonder that Andrew turned Eliza's head from the moment he walked into Greenville. Eliza helped Andrew find a cabin for his extended family, and within a year, they were married and setting up their own household. Eliza was 16, going on 17, and Andrew was 18. Andrew and Eliza had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. They were married for 48 years. Eliza outlived Andrew by only 6 months.
My dears, I am an invalid.
At the time of Abraham Lincoln's assassination in 1865, Eliza Johnson's body was wasting away from consumption, a condition we now know as tuberculosis of the lungs. Death by consumption was one of the most common killers of young adults in 19th century America. That's little consolation when the illness strikes your wife or mother, and the only treatment was bed rest. After Eliza and Andrew moved into the White House, Eliza stayed upstairs with an entourage of family members. To make matters a bit more challenging, Mary Todd Lincoln didn't move out of the White House for several weeks after her husband's assassination. Nonetheless, Eliza maintained a quiet and reliable presence during her years as First Lady. Eliza attended only 2 social events in the White House during the time she served the nation as First Lady. The first was a reception for Queen Emma of the Kingdom of Hawaii, and the second was a children's ball on the occasion of President Johnson's 60th birthday. Eliza's older daughter, Martha Johnson Patterson, managed almost all the presidential entertaining, as well as the restoration of the executive mansion. Sadly, the restoration was necessary, in part because souvenir hunters after President Lincoln's assassination had pretty much trashed the mansion.
I just knew he'd be acquitted. I just knew it.
Republicans in Congress had envisioned a reconstructed South that would deny political power to ex-Confederates and assure civil rights and economic opportunity to blacks by enfranchising black men. Those new black voters, of course, would vote Republican. President Johnson had something else in mind. In May, while Congress was out of session, he issued a blanket amnesty proclamation for all but the highest-ranking and wealthiest ex-Confederates. And he began the process of reestablishing state governments in the South by calling for state constitutional conventions of delegates elected by white male voters. Black men had no role in those conventions, so it was no surprise that the resulting state constitutions did not give them the vote or provide any support for black civil or economic rights. In fact, the new state governments quickly established black codes that left the freed people with status little better than slavery. Then Johnson went a step further and began granting special pardons with restoration of political rights and property to prominent ex-Confederates. Many of them were soon elected to state governments and to the U.S. Congress. When the newly elected Southern congressmen arrived in Washington in December 1865, Congress refused to seat them. Instead, Congress began formulating its own Reconstruction plan. It passed 2 laws protecting the economic and civil rights of freed people. Johnson vetoed the laws. Congress overrode his vetoes. Then it passed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which defined all native-born and naturalized persons, regardless of race, as citizens having equal protection under law. The amendment also penalized states that refused to enfranchise black men. The next year, Congress passed the Reconstruction Acts of 1867. The acts divided the South into 5 military districts and gave the vote to all men 21 and older. Those voters were to elect delegates to new constitutional conventions. To be readmitted to the Union and be represented in Congress, each state had to adopt a new constitution that guaranteed equal political and civil rights of all citizens, and it had to ratify the 14th Amendment. Johnson did everything he could to block congressional reconstruction. In February 1868, he removed Secretary of War Edwin Stanton from the cabinet. Stanton was a radical Republican who supported congressional reconstruction, and as Secretary of War, his job was to see that the War Department enforced congressional policies. Stanton's removal was a violation of the Tenure of Office Act of 1867, which had required that the Senate approve any such removal. As a result, the House of Representatives promptly voted to impeach Johnson for violating the Tenure of Office Act. Now, impeachment does not automatically remove an official from office. It begins a process in which the Senate acts as a court during a trial to determine whether the official is guilty of impeachment charges. The House brings the charges, and the Senate tries the case. To be removed from office, the official must be found guilty of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. A 2/3 vote in the Senate is necessary for a guilty verdict. Johnson's impeachment trial was long and complicated, involving 11 articles of impeachment. The central question, however, was whether removing Stanton qualified as a high crime or misdemeanor. Ultimately, the answer was no. On May 16, 1868, the Senate fell 1 vote short of the necessary 2/3 majority needed to convict. Johnson was acquitted. But in the course of his trial, he had promised to stop obstructing congressional reconstruction, and that left him largely ineffectual for the remainder of his term. Johnson had hoped to run for president in 1868 as the Democratic Party candidate, but that hope was dashed when the Democrats nominated former New York Governor Horatio Seymour. Seymour lost the election. So Andrew Johnson's term as president ended on March 4, 1869, with the inauguration of President Ulysses S. Grant.
The 3 sons of Eliza Johnson met untimely deaths. Eliza's oldest son, Charles, was an assistant surgeon with the Middle Tennessee Union Infantry. In 1863, Charles was thrown from a horse. He died instantly of a fractured skull. Charles was 33. Eliza's son Robert served as Andrew Johnson's private secretary. He was awarded the rank of brigadier general. He suffered from alcoholism. Tragically, Robert committed suicide 8 weeks after the end of his father's presidential term. He was 35. Eliza's son, Andrew Jr., the youngest, was affectionately known as Frank. He was a teenager during the White House years. Later, Andrew Jr. founded the newspaper, the Greenville Intelligencer, which he published for 2 years. 4 years after the deaths of both his parents, Andrew Jr. died at age 26. The ravages of tuberculosis took their toll on Eliza Johnson. Eliza died in Greenville, Tennessee on January 15, 1876, at the age of 65. She is buried in the family plot in Greenville.
A May 23, 1851 diary entry by Rutherford reveals his feelings for Lucy. He was almost 10 years older than Lucy. How could he have ever known that some 25 years later, Lucy and he would celebrate their silver wedding anniversary in, of all places, the White House?
I guess I am a great deal in love with her low, sweet voice, her soft, rich eyes. Intellect she has too, a quite sprightly one, rather than a reflective, profound one. She sees at a glance what others study upon, but will not perhaps study what she's unable to see at a flash. She's a genuine woman, right from instinct and impulse, rather than judgment and reflection. By George, I am in love with her.
Woman's mind is as strong as man's, equal in all things, and his superior in some.
Every 2 weeks, Lucy had to write an essay or discuss a ponderous question while attending Cincinnati Wesleyan Female College. She was only 16 in the fall of 1847 when she wrote this. Lucy knew her own mind at an early age and was not shy to embrace the feminist movement of her generation. Her given name was Lucy, not Lucille.
Outwardly, I keep myself very calm and quiet, but inwardly there is a burning venom and wrath, all beneath a smiling and pleasant exterior.
My Lucy always brought dignity and a cheerful spirit to the role of First Lady, yet there were times when she felt I was unfairly treated. After all, when your husband is called your fraudulency, well, it was difficult for her. She could handle criticism of her views in good humor, but when I was attacked, well, that was another matter.
It is a great mistake to suppose that I desire to dictate my views to others in this matter of the use of wine and such drinks. I do not use them myself, but I have no thought of shunning those who think and act differently.
Lucy was a temperance advocate. Since the President and Lucy were total abstainers, liquor was banned at the White House. But Lucy was still a very popular hostess. The Women's Christian Temperance Union said Lucy was their ideal woman. She was embarrassed by all the fuss. Lucy never joined the WCTU, either as First Lady or in her retirement. She did accept the lovely portrait of her commissioned by the WCTU. It hangs in the White House today as her official portrait. It is noteworthy that the White House would not be dry again until Prohibition. Lemonade Lucy left quite a legacy.
Lucy and I had a long, happy marriage. She bore 8 children in 20 years, 7 sons and 1 daughter. But we lost 3 of our children in infancy. I think I created heartache for her because she knew I could not withstand any more controversy after the suspicious electoral debacle. She chose to remain silent on issues important to her, equality and suffrage, for example. And I still regret that there was no inaugural ball. She deserved one. That must have cost her heartache. My regrets are few, but that's one of them. Dear Lucy, she loved returning to our Spiegel Grove estate in Fremont, Ohio. It was a happy place, a lovely retreat from all the pain associated with Washington, D.C. On June 22, 1889, Lucy was sewing and suddenly slumped in her big chair. The doctor came at once. The diagnosis was a stroke. Early in the morning, on June 25th, Lucy slept her life away, surrounded by her family. She was just 58 years old.
Ben and Caroline began to spend many evenings together. Sometimes they went on buggy rides and sleigh rides, but mostly they sat on the front porch at Scott House. Ben and Carrie sat and sat until Ben's classmates called him the pious moonlight dude. Ophia D. Smith from A Daughter of Old Oxford.
Shall I marry Carrie now and relieve her of those harassing doubts and fears which wear away her life? Or shall I agree to stand aside and let her hasten to an early grave?
Ben's talk was so typical of the 19th century mix of romance and morbidity, love and death. Finally, at long last, the couple married on October 20th, 1853. Ben was 20, Caroline was 21.
In 1889, the Centennial President, Benjamin Harrison, and Mrs. Harrison arrived in Washington, D.C. What they found was a rundown house, one which had not received much attention from previous administrations dating back to the early 1870s. So, Caroline gave it a complete facelift after securing $35,000 in appropriations from Congress. Rotting floors were replaced, furniture was repaired and reupholstered, private bathrooms were created, the kitchen was modernized, no more cooking in open fires. Caroline quickly became the Martha Stewart of the late 19th century. At the time, it was reported that Mrs. Harrison is the best housekeeper the White House has ever known. Electricity was installed, but the Harrisons, skittish about getting a shock, never flipped the switches themselves. Instead, they left the lights on all night, and a building engineer turned them off each morning. As First Lady, Carrie did charitable work for many causes, particularly on behalf of orphans. She was an organizer of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution and was its first President General. She helped to raise money, about $500,000, for Johns Hopkins Medical School on the condition that women be admitted to the program. Carrie was patriotic, setting the example of rising whenever the Star-Spangled Banner was played or the American flag was displayed in public. Consider this quote by Caroline Harrison from an interview with the press.
We are here for 4 years. I do not look beyond that time, as many things can occur. But I am anxious that the President and his family are properly provided for.
Carrie enjoyed the social life of the White House. I did not. Many people thought I had about as much warmth as an iceberg. I wonder if that caused her some heartache. Sadly, my beloved Carrie fell ill in 1891. She fought a good fight and tried to keep up with her engagements. 1892 was an election year. I was unable to campaign for a second term. I couldn't leave Carrie's bedside for anything. In the end, tuberculosis won out and took her life. Her breathing stopped, and Carrie was gone, just like that, 2 weeks before the election. I lost the 1892 election. Grover Cleveland, my predecessor, was also my successor. John Marsalek stated in an interview with Sarah Gabbard, editor of Lincoln Lore, in the fall 2015 issue, overall, the nation that went into the war was not the nation which came out of it. Now we've met 3 First Ladies, each of whom helped to bind the wounds of war, both on a national stage and within the privacy of their own families. And we know our nation did come out of it, but the nation was changed. The Industrial Revolution was the engine of change. It revolutionized the way our war-torn nation went back to work. It revolutionized the way we communicated with each other and with the world. It revolutionized the way we traveled and transported our goods and services.
The heart of the nation seemed to stop beating on April 14, 1865, but one invention after another pumped a fresh supply of energy and life into society. Cyrus Field's transatlantic cable, the Remington typewriter, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, Thomas Edison's phonograph and long-lasting incandescent light bulb, Nikola Tesla's induction electric motor, Kodak's camera, and Rudolf Diesel's diesel engine invited the American people to come back to productive work and to look to a brighter future.
Even the music of the day encouraged people to quicken the pace and lift one another up. In 1865, Johann Herbeck commissioned Johann Strauss to write a choral work. On the heels of Austria's defeat by Prussia in the 7 Weeks' War the following year, Strauss wrote a joyful waltz to lift the country's spirits. The song, Blue Danube, became a popular sensation in the United States.
Oh, to be sure, the post-Civil War challenges didn't disappear quickly. prejudice and injustice would rear their ugly heads again. Moving from a primarily agricultural and merchant economy to one created by the industrial tycoons of the time was not without its problems. Post-war economic and labor hardships would make the gay 90s not so gay for everybody. Yet we can be thankful for women like Eliza McCardle Johnson, evicted from her home in Greenville, Tennessee; Lucy Webb Hayes, who often visited her husband's military encampments; and Caroline Scott Harrison, committed to working with Civil War veterans. They each had a heart for service, even when their own heart was breaking. They did their part so that the Civil War would not break the spirit of the nation. Thank you for watching this program. I'm Cynthia Teese with lesser-known First Ladies, 1865 to 1892.